I picked the film The Treasure of Sierra Madre to do my project on. Although the film takes place in the Sierra Madre Mountains in Mexico, it's a very well depicted of American culture throughout the film, and it was produced by John Huston in 1948 and is very action-based and a Western-like film. It's supposed to take place in the 1920s, which was also a huge decade of change for American society. So, some social and cultural context for when this movie was supposed to take place, which was the 1920s. This was the time of the Roaring Twenties, which was kind of known as like extravagant parties, automobiles, roads and railroads really being built and expanded. This was a period in American history of really dramatic social, economic, and political change. And for the first time, more Americans lived in cities than on farms. And this was also a time where people started to move more out west. The post 1920s West, though, was much different than like the idea of cowboys, Indians, soldiers, gunfighters. Like the historical past, it was actually more of a bunch of homesteaders, which I feel like kind of contrasts from that like party and extravagant lifestyle. So the film starts off with one of the main characters, Dobbs. He's desperate for work and money when he meets Curtin, who is also looking for work. They end up doing a construction job, but they're soon out of work again. This is around the point where they meet Howard, who tells them about his plan to go to the Sierra Madre Mountains to find gold. And Dobbs and Curtin win some lottery money and are super intrigued to go on this adventure with him. They kind of go through some conflicts with the Federales and bandits that they have to end up fighting. And they're kind of venturing through foot at this point. They kind of fight them on the train, they get off, they're traveling through foot, they encounter them again. But they do end up finding gold at one point. And kind of throughout this, Dobbs becomes like the bad guy. He like threatens to kill Curtin when they find fool's gold, but then that goes on the back burner because they eventually find the real gold. But before they can even return, Howard is known to be like skilled in medicine, so some of the locals ask him to treat an ill child. So he trusts Dobbs and Curtin to hold his goods until he returns. Curtin has every intention of doing this. Dobbs has kind of been skeptical of Curtin throughout this adventure and thinks he's going to kill him in his sleep. So he tries to do the same to Curtin. He does not end up killing Curtin, but he does end up taking the goods and having to travel through the desert alone. But he becomes unfortunate because he encounters the same bandits that they fought before. They recognize him, murder him, and take his goods. And then those same bandits also end up getting executed because when they try to sell it, they realize that it's stolen. So Curtin survives. Howard comes home, and they kind of are just like, our fortune is gone, but you know what? At least we're not like dead like Dobbs and the bandits. So this film is definitely like an action Western movies. So I said this because Western movies usually take on a few ideas like the law versus the lawless or man versus nature. And we definitely see like that aspect of man versus nature in this concept of the movie. They're literally traveling through unknown nature, through the Sierra Madre Mountains, and dangerous parts of Mexico. They also like encounter bandits and federales where they have to fight them off. They fight them off on a train in the beginning. It's a shootout, so gunplay also has like a huge part of Western movies. And even one point with the whole nature aspect, Curtin sees a venomous lizard and he's hiding under the same rock that like Dobbs has his gold hidden under. And with either of them lifting it, it could have been resulted in them getting bitten, and Howard kind of has to like guide them through that. But the whole gunplay also kind of gives more of a action vibe as well. In the beginning of the film, especially that train scene. So I feel like it adds a both like Western and action vibe. So, even though this movie doesn't take place in America, it definitely represents American cultures in many ways. We don't know why Dobbs, Curtin, or Howard are actually in Mexico, but it's kind of inferred that they're trying to like make money to go back home. America was growing richer during the Roaring Twenties, and these poor men like kind of seemed like they weren't able to keep up. So in a way, this kind of represents the American dream of like almost doing anything to make it, even going all the way to Mexico for work. They may have been out of work during this time because there was also a lot of immigration from Mexico during the 20s, where the Hispanics were looking for work. In an article titled U.S. in the 1920s by St. James Press, they state cities were growing in the 1920s, and that American cities with a population of more than 100,000 by the 1920s. So with population growing during this time, there's kind of no surprise there was a need for this excess work, with railroads and roads and under other industrialization. And with the immigration from Mexico as well, this might have put some of the poor Americans out of work and kind of generated this like stereotype we have around this idea as well. So in another article actually called Popular Mexican Masculinity American Culture in the 1920s by Laura Isabel Serna, she stated that migration from Mexico to the United States increased during the late teens, in the 1920s. So at the same time, Mexico was dramatically expanding railroad systems, facilitated seeking employment in other parts of the country and southwestern United States as well. So the U.S. mining, agriculture, railroad industries needed cheap labor, and labor contractors promised Mexican workers well-paying jobs, but once they arrived, they faced hard labor conditions, lower than expected pay, and racial discrimination. In one of the opening scenes, you even see Dobbs ask a contractor if they would take a white man like himself, and he gets declined. So this kind of further proves her point that they were looking for cheap labor during this time of expansion. And lastly, you kind of see this idea of like Wild West and gold fever, which is very present in like American history. The California gold rush in 1848, many people did die. And the treasure of Sierra Madre kind of reflects that gold fever and like that out west setting. And in a film review by Ian Kane, he even mentions and foreshadowing like Dobbs' greed. He said that we first get an inkling to Dobbs' avarice. His beady eyes light up and his face twists as the mention of striking it rich. So he's talking about when Dobbs first realizes that he found someone that could potentially take him to find gold and get him out of his circumstances. This was definitely a true case for many Americans trying to make it, and for many people that were like expanding out west, and America was like booming at this time. So yeah, and these are my resources in the link above. You can click on them because I don't know why it wasn't uploading my Microsoft presentation with the audio, but I hope you enjoyed.